Hello and welcome to North Country Matters. My name is Paige Smith, and I am a student majoring in communication and media at Clarkson University. Today we are hosting a New York State legislative review with Assemblywoman Addie Russell, who represents part of Jefferson and St. Lawrence counties in the 116th River District. Joining her in conversation is Donna Seymour, the Public Policy Vice President for the American Association of University Women of New York State. Welcome, Donna. Will you get us started?
Thank you, Paige. Assemblywoman Russell, thank you so much for joining us today. We're going to take a look at the 2013 legislative year, and then we're going to ask you to dust off your crystal ball and tell us what we might be looking at when we get to 2014. 9 months ago when you were here, we talked about the women's equality agenda, and I think we all thought that that baby would have been born, signed, sealed, delivered, and into law by now. Unfortunately, that didn't quite happen just that way. The Assembly and the Senate both left Albany at the end of the regular session in June, and no measures or provisions had been delivered to the governor for signing. The Women's Equality Coalition is made up of 850 organizations, and we're still all focused on these issues. We want to see progress, and I know that you're a strong supporter of equality and a leader among the Assemblywomen.
Yes.
So how can we get these important issues and the ones that we haven't gotten to this year that need to be addressed to make the lives of New York State women and their families better? It seems to be time to move beyond the politics and get to figuring out how to focus on the issues.
Well, yes, I don't think it's a surprise to anyone that the New York State Assembly voted on the entire 10-point plan, and politics really prevented that from passing. The New York State Senate voted on individual bills, and we felt strongly that we should be moving the issue forward. I'm not going to couch last session as a failure for these issues, because we were able to bring a lot of attention to these individual components of the 10-point plan, and that I think is very valuable and something that we can build on. The actual piece of legislation wasn't finalized and put together until nearly the end of session. And so if you think about it, there was only a couple of months to really build the support and get a good head of steam behind it and ensure that it passed. We've done a lot of work. I went around the state. I know you were very involved with part of the advocacy for the Women's Equality Act. But I think we're going to pick up right where we left off as we move into the new session, and perhaps add some other types of issues to really what we need to get done on behalf of women and families here in New York State. A couple of the things that I have been personally working on are trying to address the inadequacies of our child care system across the state. That will help women and families, not just women, but families as a whole. And there's also a look at family leave insurance, which can help family members take care of their young ones or deal with illnesses in the family, or things that come up that require either a mother or a father or a son or a daughter to take time out of their work life in order to take care of needs at home. So we're actually looking at expanding the women's equality agenda to be even more inclusive of what our families are dealing with and our women are dealing with in our current society.
That's good to hear, because that's certainly something from the coalition's point of view that we've been thinking about. We had two really good successes this year in New York City with the Pregnancy Accommodation Act that was passed there, and the family leave that was signed there. So that's good for 4 out of 10 New York State women who happen to live in the city, and it certainly shows us that these are things that are achievable in a significant part of New York State, and now we just need to bring the rest of us along.
That's correct.
Let's switch gears here for a minute and look at a North Country issue, although this certainly does have ramifications around the state. We're very concerned here in the North Country with the proposal to close the psychiatric centers and turn those services into something that would be done on a regional basis. That has not only employment implications for the North Country, but local policing agencies have been concerned about what they might see in the way of mental health issues that will actually work into the criminal justice system because we don't have the local services from the psychiatric center. And local emergency rooms have also raised that as an issue, as not being really able to deal with those issues and still provide the services that they're actually in business to provide. So what do you think can be done about this issue? What's the status of it, and what can local folks do to help impact the decision making?
Well, I sit on the task force to save the Psych Center. It meets very regularly, and we're working toward keeping the Psych Center open. We've also had hearings on this issue. The Senate and the Assembly held a joint hearing several weeks ago now in the early fall to really talk about the impact that the closure would have on our area. And really the most staggering impact is on the services to the residents of our community and their families. I guess the reason given for moving is that we're going to provide services on a regional basis, while our current system is already based on a region. Most of the counties across the North Country are served by the St. Lawrence Psychiatric Center. They're proposing to move services for children to Utica and services for adults to Syracuse. First of all, some of the points that we're making is that the St. Lawrence Psych Center ranks in the top 2 to 3 consistently from year to year on quality of services, on many of the indicators that the state is looking at when it makes decisions. The state, the Psych Center scores very well. And then the other issue is the importance of family involvement in someone's recovery from a mental illness, or even just trying to get a diagnosis in the case of our youngsters, and the distance to travel all the way to Utica for folks in Jefferson, certainly in St. Lawrence County and in Franklin County, is just unsustainable. Our families are barely able to put gas in the tank to get to work every week. To then, put that burden on a family member to have to drive those distances.
Not to mention the difficulties that we have in transportation just in the winter alone, let alone the lack of public transportation, but just the sort of weather issues that we deal with up here. And that's not an easy drive down there in the winter.
No, it's not. And we're sometimes we're told that there's going to be cost savings in this area or that area. Then we're told, no, it's just to provide better services. Well, the better services are already here, as when you compare, Utica and Syracuse to the Psych Center. Yes, maybe a family member might be able to physically get there. They'll be able to put gas in the tank, but the amount of time that they have to dedicate toward recovery for their family member is going to be reduced by the drive time. So, the quality of involvement is going to go down. The ability to be involved on a regular basis is going to go down. We think that's going to cause longer stays and be less effective in getting, our folks back on the road to recovery and back into their community, being as productive as they can while they go through their treatment.
What would you say to folks, just the average person, how can we advocate for this, to keep this center here? What would be useful in terms of, as citizens, to do?
I'm very sensitive to the amount of time that people have to commit to social issues or political issues. And I think the most effective time period for our residents to be active in this is in the winter time. That is when the state goes through its budget process. A lot of decisions are hashed out, policies are adjusted, and plans are put into place in the February and March timeframe. And so, being sensitive that people have to work and take care of their families, I want people to be prepared to lift their head up and to realize that we really need their support, particularly in February and March, to send emails, to send letters, to postcards, to make telephone calls, I'm sure that there will be information coming out from the task force about where best to direct their efforts at that time. But to kind of put it in the back of your head that we're going to need help fighting for our kids and our family members, our adults that are facing mental illness, that deserve to be treated with respect and to be treated as close to their community as possible.
That's
and
right.
that's Ogdensburg, the Psych Center in Ogdensburg.
You know, what's nice to see about this process is that you're working across parties and with Senate and Assembly members, and you're really tackling this on a regional basis. That's a good model for how we actually deal with issues that need to be dealt with. We just can't play party politics, and we can't jockey positions between the two houses. So
Exactly.
that's really important. I think it's a good, it sets up a good opportunity to learn from this process.
Yes.
One of the things that we also know that is a real problem in the North Country in particular, but in lots of places in New York State, is the problem of poverty and the lack of job creation or the lack of good job creation. Too many of the jobs we have are in the low-wage sector, and even when somebody is working 2 part-time or even 3 part-time jobs, which is not unusual, they still cannot make enough to meet all of their expenses. Just this week, we learned that the food stamp program is going to be taking some mandatory cuts, and that's going to affect the bottom line for North Country families. And it's the start of the winter heating season. I saw snow in the air yesterday, which was not very welcome, but what do we do to address the issues of the working poor and the low-wage workers and the lack of job creation here in the North Country? How big a problem is that, and what can you as an Assembly member do to affect that?
Well, to add a little context to this, the New York State passed an increase in the minimum wage that is due to take effect very shortly and to continue to increase over the next couple of years. That will be an immediate impact on a family's household income that can help them to buy the groceries that they need, particularly in light of the cuts to the food stamp program. Another area that I mentioned before that I'm working on is to address problems in our child care system. There's not enough funds for families that actually qualify for child care subsidies throughout this state, and particularly in our poor counties, such as Jefferson and St. Lawrence. And so we're working to figure out how we can leverage those child care subsidies, how we can improve the logistics of child care. I have a daughter that's in pre-K, and those are fantastic educational programs that come along when a family is at that point where they're hitting a lot of financial strain, but how we can make that more accessible. One of the things that I've talked about in roundtable discussions that we've had with participants from all over the state is, should there be a transportation component for things like the pre-K program, so that school districts can really offer these meaningful programs to as many students as possible. That helps on parents having to self-transport. That cuts down on costs there. Ways that we can have more participation in the programs that we already provide. As well as, are there technical glitches that we need to address? We have a pretty rigid daycare set of regulations and rules, and are we, having a lot of providers go out of business because we're not providing a program that really reflects what's going on in our communities? So that's very powerful. If you can't have childcare, you cannot go to work,
right.
which keeps you in poverty. And then on the larger economic development front, I have been very much involved in the North Country Regional Economic Development Council, working to bring investment into the community, working on investment in the agriculture sector, which is the backbone of a lot of our economy here, as well as supporting our colleges and universities. We know that they drive our economy. But we're also looking for other opportunities. I just was part of an export trade a subcommittee roundtable where we're talking about opportunities for this area to export products on a much larger scale, and trying to create some goals for increasing our exports, not just in the North Country, but Central New York and all of New York State, because we fall behind the national average for sure.
You know, you speaking about that subcommittee that you were on reminds me, I don't know, are you still on the chair of the Service Women's Subcommittee?
I'm chair of the Women Veterans Subcommittee.
Thank you.
Yes.
Well, obviously with Fort Drum in our backyards here in the North Country, the issues that our military families are facing are many and varied. And I know you've been doing a lot of work to find out what the situation is, particularly for women veterans, and there's a lot of homelessness and other problems like that.
Yeah.
What's coming down the pike in terms of maybe some legislative ways to address those issues?
Well, actually, one of the biggest things that after I boiled down all of the discussion, is actually a large proportion of women veterans that are struggling. Many times they've experienced military sexual trauma. There have been some level of sexual assault or something in their service record, but they chose not to report it or reported it too late. So what I really work on is, first of all, we need to provide services in our communities for women veterans that understand that they may have PTSD, but it's the result of a horrific experience that had nothing to do with combat.
Right.
And so that's one of the things that you don't really need legislative action to try to address. Let's get services in place. We know this is a problem. This has to be addressed. I think that is particularly important for communities that surround military bases. I know that our military has been working very hard to address this problem. There are well publicized, accounts of where that system has broken down, where their failures have been. But I think it's important for us as a community to be supporting the work that is going on our installations, within our military, so that it doesn't seem like everything's just being done for show. It's important for us to take it seriously in military communities, provide support for those. It's men and women actually who have been impacted by military sexual trauma. But in terms of we're directing the state agencies to focus on this, to understand what the problem is, and that access to mental health services to deal with sexual assault, being the victim of sexual assault, is something that's important. You might see I'm wearing a couple of things on my lapels today, and this is actually the new symbol that's being rolled out. It's No More. It's actually focused on the area of domestic violence, sexual assault, that arena. No more of this. It's not acceptable in our society, and it's something that I take as a serious obligation, not just as an advocate for women and families, but specifically as my role in trying to advance the issues and concerns of women veterans.
Right. Well, certainly during October we always focus on domestic violence prevention and sexual assault, but of course it's a problem every month of the year, not just in October. So
correct.
So that's good. Sadly, it's a problem. I'm going to touch on a flashpoint issue here, which really, in many ways, shouldn't be a flashpoint issue. But you took a tough and principled stand in January when you voted for the New York State SAFE Act. And just about every week, if not every day, we hear another horrible story somewhere in this country about gun violence, and particularly about gun violence in kids. Guns are the second leading cause of death for children ages 1 to 19, and the leading cause of death among black children and teenagers. Guns kill 7 children in this country every day. And just this year, since the beginning of the school year, we've had 3 separate lockdown incidences in North Country schools as a result of the threat of gun violence. So, and we see guns are involved in drug trafficking, which is a big problem in too many places, that's for sure. I know the New York State SAFE Act isn't perfect, but in places like New York that have strong gun laws, we don't have the same level of fatalities that we do other places. What do you see as happening in this area going forward in terms of things that need to be fixed or need to be addressed?
Well, I agree with you. The SAFE Act is not perfect. And the way that it was also crafted and then presented to the legislature, that there's a lot of criticism, as there should be, and also that process has caused a lot of folks to not really understand what it does. And so we have an obligation to work to clarify issues and to address some of the problems. The legislature wasn't intimately involved in the drafting of the legislation. While some components were essentially taken from bills that were in the legislature, such as Mark's Law that I carried, some of those things were kind of adopted into the larger bill. But there are some other areas that we, I think, recognize need to be fixed, and some of those were that the law didn't address police officers in the manner that it should. The 7 rounds of ammunition instead of 10 has been problematic, and we've made adjustments already to that issue. The next issue that is troubling to me is what the impact of background checks on every piece of ammunition is going to be.
Right.
That's a little bit problematic. I think we need to take a second look at how that is proposed to be implemented, what impacts that's going to have on our communities. It just wasn't balanced enough to be respectful to law-abiding citizens and gun owners. In fact, today I just got my hunting license for the season. I haven't had any glitches so far, but I know that it has been impacting law-abiding, citizens. But there were parts of the law that dealt with drug activity, gang activity, and organized crime that were very important for us to pass. Background checks on the purchase of all types of guns. And the various types of ways that guns are acquired. That was an important loophole to close. I mean, we saw instances of, where that we see them in our community all the time, where it would be important to get guns out of the hands of drug dealers and things like that. So I think that the biggest thing that we need to work on is finding middle ground. Our community, our nation has become polarized by positions that different interest groups have taken. And I think that, in New York we have had gun control in place, and that maybe has, it looks statistically like that may be a reason why we haven't had as terrible of scenarios as other states have had. But it's time for us to find the middle ground, I think. We all, any gun owner understands that with gun ownership comes responsibility. You have to lock your guns up. You need to teach your children that guns are not toys. Those are obligations that I take, and especially this time of the year, we're on a heightened sense of teaching responsibility, but it's something that we address year round. Especially when squirt guns come out in the summer, you still have to talk to children, about those types of issues. So, I think that, we could make some more changes to the SAFE Act to maybe get more at those that would do harm to our children and to our communities. And that's a process that's going to play out over, probably several years at this point.
There certainly is never any lack of need for safety and training, that's for sure.
Yes.
Let's turn for a moment to 2014. We spent a lot of time in the earlier part of this year talking about school funding, and there were a lot of dire scenarios that actually turned out to be not quite as bad as we thought they were going to do when it actually got to the school funding part. But schools, as we know, are under a lot of stress from increased mandates and changes. Common Core, I think Commissioner King would agree, has been a bit of a hot potato on his plate. What do you think is going to happen with school funding come this next budget season? Do you have any sense of where we might be going with it?
Well, it continues to be one of my top priorities, as you know, but I'm actually pretty excited about a lot of the advocacy that's going on in the New York City mayoral race. Folks watching this may say, well, why would she care about what's going on in New York City? Well, one of the things that I work to get the word out about is that North Country schools are really situated very similarly to New York City, to the New York City school system. We have a high number of children attending that are in poverty. It's children that haven't had all of the advantages in life. and may come to school not as prepared. And so when it comes to the manner in which the state doles out school aid, changes that positively impact New York City also tend to positively impact schools here in the North Country. And so there's, I think, a great opportunity this year, as it is one of the top priorities of the leading mayoral candidate in New York City, to really push the discussion along a lot further. Now, we can talk about making changes to how the formula is given out, which is one of the main areas that I focus on. The other is how much money we actually spend on education.
Right.
So you can have the most beautiful formula of how to distribute school aid in an equitable manner, but if we're not putting money into that and distributing it in an equitable manner, that's where that's where
the
really
process
falls apart. That's the implementation. You can have all the best policies, but if you don't implement it, that school aid formula, it doesn't work. So we need to get money pumped back into the school aid formula. Schools have taken a hit for many years, and I would argue with you. I don't think that anybody really dodged a bad problem. I think we have to put a good face on what we have to work with. But our schools are in very tough straits right now.
They certainly are,
So.
and with a lot of competing things that they're trying to juggle right now.
Yes.
Next year is, of course, a statewide election year. What do you think that's going to have? All of the Assembly, all of the Senate, and the governor are all up for re-election. Is that going to make everybody more anxious to deliver the goods before they go into November, or is it going to tie the process up? What do you think is going to happen?
I think it could go either way. I think we need a type of leadership this year out of everyone involved that continues to want to move the state forward to try to mitigate some of the negative impacts of the federal shutdown, how that has impacted our communities. I think there's going to be a desire to make a name for yourself and to maybe be a polarizing figure, but I hope that we have all learned lessons from this fall, that polarizing figures and obstructionist government is not the way to operate. That's not good for the North Country, in my opinion. I tend to be someone who wants to build consensus to tackle problems. If we don't get everything we want, then we'll try again next year. But I think that maybe there'll be some valuable lessons learned, and hopefully we will work toward getting things done as we have in New York for the past couple of years. That's my estimation that we should be able to.
That's best case scenario if all goes well.
That's best case scenario, and I think that's probably what you'll see is we'll continue to try to be as effective and efficient as possible. We're probably going to make some stands on behalf of the most vulnerable parts of our communities, those that suffer from mental illness, those that have developmental disabilities, our children and our seniors who continue to struggle throughout this economy. And so I think you'll see a lot of us stick up for those parts of our
the most vulnerable.
And our farmers. Let's not leave our farmers out. They struggle every day to feed our state and our nation and our world.
To talk about an industry that's been through a lot of changes and continues to be through a lot of changes, absolutely.
So those are I think some of the areas that you'll see me focusing on as we move throughout the legislative year, but I think you'll see that there's really no argument when it comes to, government has some very specific purposes, and I think we need to hold strong to those.
And Paige is here to...
I'm sorry, but our time is up. Thank you all. These candidate conversations are a production of North Country Matters, produced here in the studios of WCKN on the campus of Clarkson University. This show is a civic collaboration between the St. Lawrence County branch of the American Association of University Women, the St. Lawrence County League of Women Voters, and the Communication and Media Department of Clarkson University. Until next time, remember, our North Country matters.
Thank you, Paige.
Thank you.